In 6 countries with data meeting the GRFC methodology requirements, that is Djibouti, Kenya, Somalia, South Sudan, Sudan and Uganda, 42 million people, or 29% of the analyzed population, face high levels of acute food insecurity in 2025. In the 5 countries with comparable data since 2016, that is Kenya, Somalia, South Sudan, the Sudan, and Uganda, the number of people in crisis or worse, that is IPC phase 3 or above, has tripled from 13.9 million in 2016 to 41.7 million in 2025. The Sudan remains the region's largest and most severe food crisis. Though data remains limited, 24.6 million people, representing 51% of the analyzed population, were projected to face high levels of acute food insecurity between December 2024 and May 2025 by the Integrated Food Security Phase Classification, that is the IPC. There was, however, a difference between this analysis and the one by the IPC Technical Working Group in the country, particularly in the Phase 5 or catastrophe classification. South Sudan has the region's highest prevalence of acute food insecurity, with 57% of its population in crisis or worse. In Kenya, specifically in the arid and semi-arid lands, ASALs, 2.8 million people, which is an increase by 891,000 from the 2024 peak, were projected in IPC phase 3 or above between April and June 2025. And this was largely on an assumption of below average March to May rainfall season. The season ultimately improved pasture and water availability in some parts, but erratic distribution and dry spells in others disrupted crop development. Due to seasonal improvements, at the moment, 1.8 million people in Kenya are estimated to be facing high levels of acute food insecurity, so a decline. Between October 2025 and January 2026, however, the number is expected to rise to 2.1 million, and this is due to the expected impacts of the forecasted below average October to December seasonal rains. 27.6 million people are in crisis, that is IPC phase 3, meaning that they either have food consumption gaps reflected by high or above usual acute malnutrition, or are marginally able to meet minimum food needs, but only by depleting essential livelihood assets. This is a 5% increase since 2024, driven by a rise in Kenya, in Somalia, and South Sudan. Lastly, in terms of severity, 33.6 million people are in stressed, that is IPC phase 2. This is 2.4 million more people than in 2024, with the largest increases recorded in Kenya, followed by Somalia, the Sudan, and South Sudan. Populations in this phase need livelihood support and resilience strengthening. Of particular concern to us are the 15.6 million people classified in this phase in the Sudan and who risk transitioning into worse-off phases. The upcoming October to December 2025 rainfall season is forecast to be drier than usual in several parts, and this includes eastern Kenya and much of Somalia, which remains of concern given that drought conditions currently persist. Unfortunately, this risks negatively impacting crop production, pasture regeneration, and water availability, and it also underscores the need for anticipatory action. Second is conflict. For the past 2 years, conflict in the Sudan has been the leading driver of acute food insecurity in the region. We will zoom into the Sudan later in the presentation. In South Sudan, escalating hostilities in Upper Nile since February 2025 have worsened acute food insecurity, with a plausible risk of famine in Luakpin as well as Ulang counties. In Somalia, insecurity has continued to drive loss of livelihoods and displacement. Intercommunal violence and resource-based conflict also affects parts of Kenya and Uganda. Lastly, in terms of drivers is economic shocks. Adverse macroeconomic conditions characterized by low foreign currency reserves, local currency depreciation, high inflation rates continue to undermine food access in almost all the countries, but particularly in Sudan and South Sudan through high food prices.
Currently, we are focusing that we are going to have 1.8 million Kenyans who will require emergency food in the next 3 months because of the envisaged failure of rains, of short rains. We are prepared as a government to deal with any emergencies arising from this drought. We have alerted our institutions. The State Department of Special Programs is on standby to provide any Kenyan affected by drought, any Kenyan affected by food shortage. Under Article 43 of the Kenyan Constitution, we are obliged to ensure that no Kenyan dies of food shortage, no Kenyans dies of lack of food. More than 4 billion shillings will be required to take care of that food shortage so that the government buys food for people who will be affected by drought in the next 3 months. What we have done again is that we are going to fund state institutions who are concerned with providing resilience for the victims of drought. Resilience in terms of providing water, in terms of restocking, helping Kenyans to cope with emergencies of drought. All these measures are being currently put in place.
That is a problem that while we optimize the system and while we spend time taking these steps, we shouldn't forget, and that shouldn't impede our immediate action for those 42 million people in IGAD countries facing these food crises. Some of the horrible drought-like conditions and lower expected rainfall for the coming season. So, we can work smarter in that way. There is, of course, cash, right? So instead of, bluntly put, instead of giving
on this report that is being launched today, and to help us with that, as you mentioned, we'll go into your comment of what you've seen today with the highlights that we have. It's a longer report, but everyone will be able to get their hands used to invite you, as well as being available on the website after we launch this. So let me call on stage and in the particular region that we represent here. So an hour of conversation, just 60 minutes, and after that we will be able to go into Q&A, about 30 minutes for the United Nations Children's Fund, UNICEF, Eastern and Southern Africa Regional. The mics will be handed down to the panel. We appreciate that. With this report that we've seen 42 million people facing high levels of acute food insecurity in...
Right? There are things we can do. So we can work together better. And one, as a conversation with WFP and UNICEF is currently ongoing, let's talk about efficiencies in our supply chains. We need to be striving for in these days. And finally, of course, it was mentioned as well, but reports like the regional focus or even the global report on food crises.
A similar period, April to June of 2024 for Somalia. So, and one of the reasons is the funding aspect, humanitarian funding reducing. So, with what more to be able to shore up basic services as a way of speaking to the IGAD governments that are represented here, as an example from your end.
Thank you very much. And because even before this, fund cut has come online, we've tried our best. As from 2021, with of course, billion. for a coverage, drug coverage of Somalia. Of course, the mentioned drought is an aspect of climate drug insurance, which we have been purchasing for quite some time now. For the last